Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited about what we've got going tonight. The Powerhouse panel is taking a slightly different format as two of our guests are joining from different parts of the globe. Jody Ettenberg is in Ottawa and Mike Soden is in Scotland. They've been pre-recorded. Our third guest, Jackie Bryant, is with us live and will help to answer your questions. Please put them in the QA feature, as Nicole mentioned, not the chat. As I said, our first guest is Mike Soden. Mike is joining us from Scotland via pre-recorded interview. His Substack newsletter, Everything is Amazing, has taken off, and now paid subscriptions allow him to focus on science reporting. Mike's freelance credits include CNN Travel and the San Francisco Chronicle, and he was recently featured in the Substack Bros series. We have his segment right now.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, you have a diverse background, and you say that all your skills fit together to support you now. What do you think is the key to your success?
Ooh, that's a difficult question. In fact, I'm not even sure success is the right word. One really interesting thing about starting paid newslettering in the way that I've been doing is that yet again, like with all my other careers, I'm learning that as going into it, I'm learning how well other people are doing and all the things I still have to learn. So every time I realize that I've got that learning experience before me, I feel like, oh, fantastic. This is where I want to be, because you don't want to be going on and learning a bunch of skills and realizing that you're or feeling like you're better than everyone else at it. That's, as well as being a bit arrogant, that's also the death of curiosity. And so I'm going into what I'm writing about with this sense of excitement at all the things I want to learn. So yeah, my diverse background is, let me see, I was a computer nerd at school. I worked in a pottery, I've worked in insurance, I've worked as a barista. I studied archaeology. I worked as an archaeologist for a while. I worked in a print shop in a university, and I've done lots of different jobs. But the thread through all of that has been all of this, the internet, and everything that's been growing out of the internet. And I've always wanted to be a writer in some sense. And the internet really unlocked that for me. It allowed me to start thinking a bit entrepreneurially about the kind of writing I wanted to do. So I was doing travel writing before this, and then the pandemic came along and travel writing took a big hit. And I realized I could just have a go for the first time at creating the kind of writing that I wanted to do for a long time, but felt I couldn't, because I didn't see it as a niche. So I've kind of had a go at blending together my enthusiasms to date and trying to create a niche, and it seems to be working. So in my terms, it's a massive success because it's just working. It's allowing me to keep now sustainable with it. But in terms of comparing with everyone else, there's so many people doing brilliant things, and I do not feel successful in that sense, which is good. I don't want to get too big for my boots.
It does fill in some of the spaces, but I'm wondering about the actual steps that you took, what would you tell someone who's brand new to Substack, for example? We're just going to focus on that particular model right now, and how do they set up their newsletter to become successful? How do you set up for success?
Right. Ooh, right. How do you set up for success? I think at the beginning you have to study what other people are doing and learn the basics. So I very much have done that. I subscribed to a lot of newsletters that I admired, and I studied what they were doing, and that was to just get myself off the ground. But there comes a point, and hopefully you get to it quite quickly, where you see something different that you can do. So I think it's very important to well, Substack is very easy to start using. It's really, really simple. It's the matter of setting up a Substack newsletter is half an hour's work, really. And it's as easy as just opening an email account, really. The difficult bit is the growing it and getting people in, and then learning the softer skills of just knowing how to get people's attention with what you're doing, and that comes gradually over time. But the mechanical basics of starting a Substack are really simple, and I'm sure that it's exactly the same with every other paid newsletter format there is. And that's the great thing about these tools. You can get started really quickly, and that's a huge benefit. So those skills at the beginning are easy, and I don't feel that anyone who has any experience at writing online in any capacity is going to have any problems setting themselves up on it. So that's great. That's the tech side that intimidates me, because I'm not technically minded, really. That's the tech side out the way. The longer term skills that you need to learn are things like, well, eventually when you go paid, what are you offering? That's a really, that's a thing that a lot of paid newsletters really, you have to get really creative. And if you're doing something like when I started my newsletter, I was running it for free for 6 months. So there was no way for anyone to start paying me a subscription for those 6 months, because I just wanted to prove what I was doing was worthy of interest, let alone worthy of, I felt like I had something to prove, because what I was doing was a little bit strange and didn't really quite look like anything else I was reading, hopefully. And at the end of those 6 months, when I launched the paid version, I was offering a little bit more of I was offering an extra 20% essentially on top of everything I was offering for free, because I think it's important to offer your best work for free, even if you have a paid offering. And that is a bit of a counterintuitive thing, but you really, your best work is your the marketing.
So let's wrap this up with a more general question I'd like to bring back to you. Where do you think the future of journalism is going, and where do you see yourself going with this particular model?
Ooh, big picture stuff, right? Okay. I started all this really as an experiment. I've been paying attention to reader subscription models for writing for quite a while. And I've liked the idea of it. I saw the growth of Patreon, and then Substack came along, and I saw the other competitors coming up and trying to steal Substack's crown, and that's going to continue going on. I think in the long run, it's not going to replace. I don't think it should ever replace journalism, both national and particularly local journalism. Local journalism is a really important thing. And the great thing about Substack is that there are a bunch of local journalists who have moved to Substack because it just makes it easier for them to build their platform and run a subscription model. There's a newspaper that was in Manchester, in north of England, and they moved to Substack just wholesale, and they're doing really, really well. And it's a city newspaper, and that's really good to see. But in terms of I think that there's a tendency when everyone is trying to analyze journalism trends in the long run to see, oh, X is dead, Y is the new X, and that is, that I've seen that, blogging is dead, Tumblr is the new blog, all this kind of stuff. It's been going on as long as I've been doing things online. And this isn't, and it's always a really ridiculous simplification of what's really going on. So I think that paid newsletters and paid offerings and individual writers building up their audiences and getting paid by those audiences, that's going to sit alongside journalism. And I would hope that it's going to improve it, because I hope that it's going on now. There's a number of writers who use their newsletters to criticize in a good way, in a healthy way, to criticize big newspaper stories, and to provide that kind of that dialogue around them, and that supports it. So I don't see that. I don't get worried about any of that. For individual writers, I think it's incredibly important because it gives them another option, and it gives them an option that they can consistently make money with. So I see journalists who are doing really well, and they're writing the kind of stuff I grew up feeling very strongly that I wanted to read, but they're also building their own offerings and they're monetizing them, and it just helps them keep doing good work. So yeah, so I think in the long run, individual power to just be sustainable is going to increase. But I'm not worried about threats to existing models at all.
Great. And for you, do you think you'll stay curious forever?
I don't know. I'm just having so much fun with the experimental side of things. My newsletter is changing season to season. I work in seasons, so I'll work in about a 2 or 3 month block, and then I'll change the main topic that I'm focused on, and it gives me a chance to have a paid subscriber drive at the end of it. But every season it's evolving in a slightly different way. So I'm just enjoying the ride at the moment. I want to write books, and I'm going to be publishing a book through the newsletter. But in the long run, I don't know. This is just it's a ride, it's a journey, and I'm happy to be on it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking us along on that ride too.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.
Our second guest, who is Jodi Ettenberg. She is formerly a lawyer. Jodi traveled the world for a decade, sharing stories on her award-winning website, Legal Nomads. Her work led to features in the New York Times, CNN, National Geographic, BBC Travel, Guardian, and more. After a lumbar puncture left her disabled in 2017, Jodi now writes about curiosity, resilience, and the challenges of big life changes. She also sits on the patient advisory panel for the Spinal CSF Leak Foundation. Here's her interview. You have become a master of change. And what's one talent that you, looking back, you can say helps you the most?
I think the change in my life originally from quitting my job as a lawyer to sort of branching out and building a business almost accidentally, because it wasn't really my plan to do so, has served me in this current situation where, for those of you who don't know, I'm currently disabled with a spinal CSF leak. I only stand up for a certain amount of time per day. So this webinar is like in my up time, and I can't work the way I used to. And the ways that I have built my business previously have really helped me now. I think that agility and that ability to sort of serve as an advocate for yourself in the different streams that you work, be it online world, or for journalists traditionally going out, having the contacts you have, being able to connect dots in different ways, which is required when you are working for yourself, and being creative about the ways that you produce income. I think that's come in handy now, even from a health perspective, but certainly from a business one, where I've had to reinvent myself like a lot of us have during the pandemic. For me, it happened in 2017, so a bit earlier. And just having learned what that agility looks like, being able to shift into something new and sort of have the space to let things fall and unfold and then make decisions as you go. It's very different to the sort of career I thought I would have growing up, and very different to being a lawyer, which was very lockstep. So I think that agility is probably the greatest skill, and one that all of us these days benefit from a lot.
Excellent. You've kind of been ahead of the trends throughout your life, it sounds like. And now with Substack and Patreon, what led you to those specific avenues?
I think a combination of necessity and stubbornness, I would say. When I started my own blog, I started it for my friends and family originally. It wasn't meant to be a business. I sort of, like I said, accidentally became an entrepreneur. The thing that I was very adamant about was that I didn't want to take sponsored content. I didn't want text links. I didn't want advertising on my site. I wanted it to be a site I would want to read and just enjoy long form writing for people who stumbled upon it. that meant I needed to think of different ways to earn income. For me, that was, celiac translation cards for people who are celiac like me and wanted to travel, which I sell, and that was set up. It meant public speaking. It meant a bunch of things, but it didn't mean putting ads on the site. And so when my accident happened and I ended up disabled, I had to really think about, what does this look like for me as a business, and how do I evolve with the values that I care about the most? I didn't want these readers who've stuck with me through all of this, who are incredibly engaged and, really want me to be well and very kind about what's been going on, to suddenly have a site, that served a ton of ads to them. And they were the ones who suggested the Patreon. They wanted to find a way to support me that was creative. And it has been a great way to stay in touch with sort of a core group of readers who are very excited to follow, whatever progress I have been able to make, like standing up now. For 4 years, I was 22 hours in bed. So this is big progress. The Substack for me was a necessity in terms of the cost. I was using a different email software, but I wasn't able to work anymore. For me, moving to Substack it was free. And I also feel very strongly about having access for people who can't afford it as well. So my plan was, I'm not going to charge for the Substack because I'm charging for the Patreon. I would pick one of the two. And for me, the Substack was an excellent way to keep all my readers informed. And for those who were able to have the privilege to help support me in a different way, the Patreon was available to them. I think Substack is a wonderful model for people who have one thing and they have some open access and some subscription within the Substack itself. They can do both in one together. Patreon offered me sort of a different mechanism where I could do live streams. I can have different ways of updating my community that Substack didn't offer. So that was the split for me and how I wanted it to come about.
Now, journalists are storytellers at heart, and it sounds like we all need to think about becoming entrepreneurs as well. It's also about building community. What are some tips you can give us for that?
Well, I think first of all, anyone can be entrepreneurial, right? It's sort of a trope that you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to have a huge appetite for risk. That's just not what the world is like right now. The internet gives us this incredible benefit that we can all be entrepreneurial in different ways at a sliding scale of risk for what works for us. And for journalists, traditionally, where that storytelling comes into, being hired by a publication, doing freelance pieces, or being on staff, there is a very different model that's now evolving, where there are many different pieces to what that entrepreneurial spirit looks like. For the community building, it's a lot harder to do that with a legacy publication, or if you're on as a staff writer somewhere, because historically, the paper. I read National Geographic, for example. I read the New York Times. I read whatever. I'm not necessarily reading for the columnist. There are exceptions. Matt Levine, my favorite financial journalist, when he left and went to Bloomberg, I followed him. I was there for Matt, but I was reading Matt, in his email newsletters and his columns. It was already sort of half new media. I think the benefit of having this sort of access to your community directly through subscription models, through membership models, or even shorter form video, which is, more and more of a focus on TikTok for younger people, some older people as well. I'm not on TikTok myself yet, but Instagram Reels, for example, shorter form video allows community building that you can still funnel people back to your other publication if you don't have your own newsletter or not. But having your own newsletter, even if it's not necessarily a paid subscription yet, is a really good way to start building community. And what I used to say when travel blogging started, and I got a lot of criticism for example, joining Twitter and tweeting about astronomy and science, people were not happy in the travel community at the time that I wasn't just talking about travel, but we're all multifaceted people. And I think it's really important when you think about building community to not overthink what that means, right? People care about you because of what they've learned from your writing. They love to learn more about the quirks and the narrative loops that you can bring into your life for them, to teach them a little more about yourself without revealing the dirty laundry, right? Just telling them more about the things that make you feel like you. The little thing, my community knows I really don't like olives. I even had the Greece tourism board try and feed me olives that I would enjoy because they saw that I had tried them around the world and never found one I liked. And they were like, we'll fix this for you. But unfortunately, I still find olives disgusting. But this is something small that my readers know about me. And I get tagged in olive photos or get sent olive jokes all the time. You know, it's something tiny, but it's this narrative loop that they have been able to latch onto. And it's those little silly things, or bigger things, whatever it is, that make you you, that I think is the best way to start building a community if you're coming from a background of just traditional freelancing where that's not been the norm.
It's kind of hit and miss, isn't it? You never know what's really going to take off. You just have to get out there and do it.
Right. And I think we don't need to put the added pressure on ourselves to paint this perfect picture. Like, messy is life. And the way that I've always shared my health issues, you know, there's certain things that I've never disclosed. You know, I always keep my dating life private. I keep my family's business private. There are certain things that I deserve privacy. We all do. New media doesn't mean, you know, here's everything in the world that you get to know about. But it does mean that you get to humanize yourself in a way that columnists and journalists never really got to do much of in the past. And that can be dangerous if you're someone who doesn't have boundaries, but most of us do. And I think what it serves is this beautiful tool to essentially create an environment with your community as you build it, where they care about you, they know you, they're rooting for you, and that gives this access to that side of humanization that we just didn't have before.
So we're wrapping this up now, and I just have one more question for you. I know You're looking at a lot of different avenues that you could go into, possibilities. Where do you see yourself going professionally?
That's an interesting question. I think, well, first of all, the industry itself, right, is going somewhere different. For 2022, publishers were talking a lot about how they're pushing money towards subscription models. You know, ad revenues are going back up, memberships are being pushed. I think it's a really interesting tension between what that looks like for the general population and what that looks like for us. There is, you know, the question of access, like I mentioned before. Is the subscription model super serving the rich and educated groups of people, where people who don't have the means to subscribe, like, how are they going to get news? Are we, you know, should we be giving open access or have a sliding scale? There's the question of subscription fatigue and what that looks like. You know, if everyone's making everyone subscribe, people are just going to get tired of it all. And there's the talent issue where people are, you know, there's the argument between New York Times, The Atlantic, other publications starting a lot of newsletters now, again, vying for the inbox and the talent. Where, as a journalist, do you feel like you are best served? For me personally, professionally, you know, to be honest, Elaine, I don't know that I'll have a career. Like, I'm not sure, you know, the extent to which I can work. The Patreon supports me. Without it, you know, I would be on disability, and the ability for me to just be able to have the benefit of this membership to keep me afloat at a time where I can't work has been a real honor. That my community not only supports me, but like pushed me to do it. They kept asking for it for years. I would eventually like to start a podcast about chronic illness and just how you make your way through grief and loss in tough times, because I think that's really important for everybody. And just hope that I can continue sharing the conditions I have and what I've learned along the way to help other people feel less alone.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. Curiosity doesn't go away, no matter where you're at.
It never does. And that's the beauty of it all, right? No matter how small your world is, you can still be curious.
And we're on to our last live guest. San Diego-based freelance journalist Jackie Bryant is with us. She writes mostly on the cannabis beat, and she reports for a variety of local, state, and national digital and print publications. She also writes the Substack newsletter Cannabitch, which was included in the 2021 Best American Travel Writing Anthology. Jackie was recently named the managing editor of San Diego Magazine. Welcome, Jackie.
Hi, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You've worked awfully hard over the last 10 years writing about travel, wine, and now focusing on the weed beat. When San Diego's City Beat magazine went under and you continued your Cannabitch column on Substack, what drove you to that outlet?
Well, City Beat went under in March 2020, which, if that's ringing any bells for anybody, is also when the entire world fell out. So being a freelancer, I lost, I think I must have lost about $15,000 or $20,000 worth of work overnight, literally overnight. It was, I'll never forget the day. It was March 15th, the day that the lockdowns came down and just everything got canceled. There were no budgets. That was kind of it. And everyone was like, bye, see ya, stories. I had 5 stories killed. It was a crazy thing. And so the paper ending at the same time, I was like, wow, I have a lot of free time on my hands. And I don't know if the state of California is going to get its act together to set up unemployment for independent contractors. And I have to live. So I should figure this out. And also, yeah, when you're writing all the time and it stops, or it gets stopped for you rather, there's a creative itch that needs to be scratched. So a lot of people in the first couple of months were sort of like, what are you going to do with Canabitch? You should do something with it. You should pitch it to someone else. And it's hard to get a column placed at a publication. I know that, et cetera, et cetera. And so a few of my freelance colleagues out in the wider world, especially people on the food beat, had started flocking to Substack. Or this was, like right at the beginning of the pandemic. And that's kind of when the first like crush happened. I feel like before it got really popular. And I said, okay, cool. That's a newsletter service. It looks simple. The interface is very clean. I wanted something very bare bones. I didn't want to turn this into a new magazine. I didn't want it to be a production. I just wanted to literally write and send it out and maybe take it a bit further. Obviously, Canabitch, my column was focused on San Diego. And so I'm like, well, I have a chance to maybe write about this for a wider audience. So I put it on Substack, called it the same thing, trademarked the name Canabitch, hired someone to give me a logo, which gave it a little instant gravitas, even though it was just me. And I published the same type of stories that I would in the print column, but longer and with a much wider scope, beyond San Diego. So, or they used to be 700 words before. Now anyone who reads it will tell you they're quite a bit longer. But it was kind of just a chance for me to stretch my legs and also just make sure that I was continuing to report, even though I wasn't formally employed. And I thought, hey, if people buy this, all the better. And they did. So it did keep me, it ended up being, I'll call it a hobby newsletter, albeit a very fine-tuned hobby that makes me money. But it carried me through those first several months of the pandemic until budgets replenished and I could start pitching out for work again, because I never wanted to stop that. And it also helped me until unemployment got set up. So it was meaningful. I think I made about $5,000 off the jump in the first few months. And that was very meaningful money, especially at that point in the pandemic. And I'm happy to share numbers and Q&As and everything, but it's not my full-time income. It has never been my full-time income except for that period. So I started getting back work, and then I kept that as part of the stable. So right now my gross annualized revenue is around like $5,000 a year. So that's what I make from the newsletter, and that's kind of how it fits into my overall thing. So it emerged, and then I wanted it to be the full thing, and then I brought it back. So now it's just one part of kind of my whole toolkit, if you will.
It's great. It's a niche, and you found something to really focus on. And do you think that was part of the reason it was successful? And did you do a lot of outside of Substack marketing to bring people in?
I put it on social media, which my social media following has grown by a decent amount over the pandemic, but it's still not huge, but it's very engaged. And I think that's more a function of a few things, but especially it's the niche, right? It's the subculture reporting. It's something very specific. It's something a little weird that not everybody has access to, or is that a little sexy, right? Not everybody uses drugs. Not everybody uses cannabis. And so even people who are not into it are kind of curious, like, what is this all about? So I do think that helped very much, because it creates, what you're getting if you're clicking on something with a weed leaf that says Canabitch, right? Like, you don't maybe know 100% what you're getting, but you gotta have a good idea. And so in that way, no one's really coming to it who doesn't want to be there. So I find it easier to trap people. And I mean that in the most loving sense. So I think the niche really helps, because if you are selling a very specific product that theoretically anybody could get anywhere else in media, right? You can go to a magazine or a newspaper, hopefully you can, or a digital publication, and you can get a full range of topics. But why, people aren't coming to me for that. People are coming because they want to hear weed stories. And so I had hit that in the print column, and I knew I just kind of had to like tweak what was in it. But the niche to me is always, I really believe that's a core of why it's worked out for me. And also because maybe I hit it before other people did. I think I was like right before the curve of maybe some other cannabis writers who got on there. And so I was sort of able to make my mark. But of course, having been a print column before that definitely helps with momentum. It helps with branding. But yeah, I didn't do too much outside marketing. As mentioned, like I did build back up my work and I started pitching out again. And I would say, honestly, I know that Substack doesn't like people to say this, but it is true. Even when I was publishing regularly on a schedule, there was growth there, but the most meaningful growth, truthfully, has just been through marketing myself and my writing and publishing in big outlets and going on podcasts and doing panels like this and just being active on social media and cultivating a community. I don't know if it's a community. I know other people use that word. I don't really know if that's what I look at it as, but I think there is a give and take there. There is a relationship there. And I think cultivating that relationship with readers is kind of essential to making this work. So long story short, kind of meandering. Yeah, the niche for me is essential.
And help me if I'm wrong, but you're kind of taking an angle recently more on the social justice side and trying to tell the stories that aren't being told in other outlets. Do you think that's helped with your Substack following too?
Yeah, I think when people think of weed, and this is how I got into weed writing, I was very, very heavy into wine journalism a number of years ago. And I thought, wow, I can write about cannabis the same way I write about weed from a lifestyle perspective, right? There are tasting notes, there's evaluations, there's an agricultural aspect, obviously. There's a whole lot going on here. People buy it, they want to know reviews, there are all these different kind of products. So I was like, okay, this is a lifestyle topic, but you spend 2 minutes, and if you're observant at all within the weed world, and you realize, of course, it's not even legal. We may think it's legal here in California, but it is actually federally illegal still. So it is actually illegal for everybody. Every cannabis business that is operating is doing it illegally. So right there, it's criminalized already. So you can't ever look at it purely from a lifestyle perspective because it is inherently politicized. It is inherently criminalized. There are people who are still in jail for it. There's active policy happening every day. At any given moment, I think there's about 135 bills in the federal government concerning cannabis that are open right now and being discussed. It is an ever-moving topic, and it touches environment. There are environmental issues. I mean, bringing an industry that existed from the shadows into the light is a huge thing. So for me, it was more just a chance to level up my reporting through a niche subculture topic. So whereas before I wasn't a policy reporter, well, now I write policy stories on cannabis for the San Francisco Chronicle. And I was able to explore that in my Substack and kind of tease out ideas there and kick them to my readers without, I keep the same standards. I fact check, and I do have people look over it and edit it, and I make sure that that's all tied up. But I'm allowed to put first person in it, which, in traditional journalism, you're not really doing unless you're Hunter S. Thompson. And it kind of just allowed me to play with the little devices and play with it literarily and do a little more storytelling and do it a little more different to see if these ideas works and if I could do that kind of reporting. And then it just became quickly obvious that I was trying to do more. And so cannabis became a lens. And so, I've done policy reporting, criminal justice reporting, investigative reporting, things that, I was just a food and travel writer before that. I never got to do that. And I think my Substack and being able to explore that was a really big part of that, because I may have not gotten that chance to do it at a publication because I didn't have that. Now that can be risky, right? And legally risky and et cetera. I had a crew of mentors, writers, investigative journalists, editors who were behind the scenes kind of helping me make sure that I wasn't, gonna get sued to oblivion for some of the stuff I was writing. But it really helped me level up my reporting and kind of broke it all open for me. And yeah, that's weed and Substack right there.
Well, there's no question that you are very passionate about this,
yes.
As well as Mike and Jody about their niches as well. So I want to back up a little bit. You've come through journalism in kind of now correct me if I'm wrong, a non-linear way. Would you say, what would you recommend for people who are listening about going more traditional routes or taking the opportunities as you find them that are maybe more risky?
I mean, it's a really tough one to say because I came into it purely through my own interest and the fact that I knew I was a decent writer. I just had a different career path. I used to work in finance, and I just, naturally found myself, hey, maybe I could write restaurant reviews and doing that on the side. And that's how I inched in, and here we are. But I advocate nonlinear, but you really do have to. It's hard to do without resources. The truth is that some privilege is inherent. Not all the time necessarily, but it really helps. Like I have been freelance now. I mean, I started my new job yesterday, but before that, it was almost 7 years. And through that time, I went through a pandemic and a divorce, and I did all of that while I was freelance, which, by the way, I don't recommend if you can avoid it, but I did do it, and I'm alive and solvent. So that's really cool. So it's weird. Like I advocate for the non-traditional path because it worked for me. And there are so many weird opportunities, and this industry is so broken that if you stay the traditional path, there's just no guarantee it's even going to work out for you. Like, I mean, I could be fired right now and then I'm out of a job. Whereas, last week I had like 15 jobs when I was still full-time freelance, right? So it's like, it's really hard for me to advocate otherwise, because even though I figured it out and it required a lot of grit and a lot of sacrifice and a lot of piecing things together, there was a time when I first got divorced where my parents helped me out for a couple of months. Not everybody has that. And so like, that's obviously a privilege. I don't have student loans. That's obviously another thing that I don't have to worry about. So, there are a number of things. So of course I love the non-traditional path. It has afforded me an incredible life. I could die tomorrow and I would have no regrets. Like it's really given me an incredible path. But at the same time, I don't know how accessible that is for everyone. And I have to be totally honest about it. And there have been times I have been dead broke. I mean, like broker than broke. And that was a tough pill to swallow too. And it was like, what am I even doing? And so I don't know. It's kind of a roundabout way of saying, like, if you can make it work, by all means, there are so many opportunities out there to grab. And if you're just creative and you think outside the box a little, there's so much to do. I would just be really careful that you are aware about the risks and you do try as hard as you can to have some kind of safety net, because like if you take the non-traditional path, like you don't know when your husband's going to walk out on you someday and you don't have money anymore. And it's like, wait a minute, this was working, but I don't have a journalism degree. I don't have a staff job in my history. Like, what do I do now? And those things have been challenges. It worked out for me. And, again, I've networked and worked very hard, but it is hard. It's hard to say that it's a model that you can replicate, but at the same time, you can totally do it. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm trying not to make it a cop-out, or you know what I mean?
No, it does. It's very helpful. Yes.
Yeah, it's like, how do I tell someone jump ship and go independent and be a weirdo and totally like screw convention, but at the same time, people need health insurance. So it's like you have to weigh your individual circumstances and you have to be very real with your limitations. And part of the reason why I took this job is that I had a great 7 years full-time freelance. And actually I've been doing better than I've ever had money-wise. But for me, the level of work that it took versus the effort it took to even just get to that level kind of burned me out a little, to be perfectly honest. And so that's why Substack for me has always been a part of the whole, because I realized early on I didn't necessarily want to chase subscriptions all the time, but I do want to make a little money from it to make it worth my time. And so I've fallen back into Substack as a marketing tool for me as a journalist and a writer that I can use to showcase what I'm really about and what I really do, and also a creative and intellectual home for me, because the stories I write there are never going to get picked up elsewhere, but they work there. They've gone viral, they've got picked up for other things. So there is like a thing that works, but I know like most places aren't going to want to publish like a hybrid reported first person story. So Yeah,
I
go
think-
independent, but be realistic. I
I
get
think that Mike can hear some things that run in alongside what his experience has been. Mike, you've been you've been writing about science and curiosity. What subjects do you cover, and how radically do you change the subject matter quarterly?
Well, again, that is one of the great things about Substack. I mean, everything that Jackie was saying there was absolutely my experience of just the freedom of being able to experiment, and the way that the topics that I've been tackling have been very much dictated by the things that I've seen working and I've seen people respond to. So I've pivoted. I started working in seasons. So I would do a season about 10 weeks of stuff. And then I would have a week of basically a paid subscriber drive. I did my NPR thing, and I was, trying to get people to say nice things about what I've done and so on. And then that would be over. And then I could get back to not annoying most of my readers with my pitching, and just get back to trying to tell the stories that they were interested in, that I could see that they were interested in. So it's been a continual feedback loop. And one of the things that I learned along the way was I can use Twitter as my marketing channel and create these enormous Twitter threads that just kind of bleed enthusiasm all over the place, and just really show that I'm kind of feeling this stuff as I'm writing it, and I'm trying to make the people reading it feel my excitement and enthusiasm and interest. So when I saw all of that working, I started changing the way I was doing things, and now I'm working. I pick a theme every season. So one season was optical illusions. The next season the season before that was fake maps, and these are all things that I'm personally nerding out about, but I'm also trying to find out things that I don't know, and really kind of dive into the weeds and try and find stories that I've never seen anywhere else, or I've never come across myself. And so I get that kind of that excitement. So it's really enthusiasm is powering my newsletter, and enthusiasm is what I'm trying to convey through it. And that's what seems to be really working. Because when you with a good science story, when you have that wow moment, it's an emotional reaction. And we're used to thinking in terms of science stories as, well, this is really good information. These are things I should know, but really that wow is so much of storytelling. And if you can keep giving your audience those wow moments, then they'll feel enough to subscribe and to sign up to a paid subscription and keep coming back and sharing. I mean, leaning into finding those wow moments has been fantastic for sharing. So, and that's really powered what's happened on Twitter. And what's happened on Twitter has led to my newsletter essentially blowing up in February, when I had a thread that reached 9 million people, and my subscribers just kind of went through the roof. And it was just a feedback loop. So so in terms of the topics, I'm continually looking for what that intersection of what I'm interested in and what I think most people don't know about a topic. So I'm always looking for that. And that's kind of turning into the core of my business model. And around that, I'm exploring curiosity as a science.
Well, thank you for that. That was one of our questions from our Q&A. So I want to remind people to put your questions in there. We have another one that both you and Jackie might be able to answer. Can Substack replace having a website? And what would you recommend?
I don't think so. Like a website, like a portfolio website, because for me, my website is a landing page to showcase my work and tell people about me. Substack is part of my work. And Substack really is a newsletter platform, and it is formatted as such. I mean, of course, there's a landing page and it's very web optimized, but it is a newsletter product, and I just don't know how else you would showcase your work on there. And also, like, legally, you wouldn't be able to republish it. So I think if you're talking about like a portfolio website, like an About Me, No, and you should have multiple digital properties if you can. They link back to each other. It feeds into SEO. There are multiple things that you can link to. So me personally, emphatic no, for what it's worth.
And Nicole, did you have something you wanted to add to that? Okay. And Mike, what do you think? Have you ever tried the blogging or website route?
Yeah, very, very little to add to what Jackie said there. But one thing about Substack that is great is that it's kind of a hybrid in that, yes, it is a newsletter platform, and the first thing that everyone gets are the newsletters. But then you have the web version, which you can treat as a blog. So you can go back to those kinds of things that were working back in 2010, 2012, and start trying to resurrect some of that, like comments. I mean, most of the comments that I get are from people who I've sent back. So I'm continually with my newsletters, I'm sending people back to previous newsletters, which are now blog posts. So you can keep resurrecting. That sounds a little bit morbid. You can keep bringing up the material that you feel like didn't reach the audience it could have, or
Totally. I do that all the time, and it works. It works. Pieces have reblown up because of that. Sorry to interrupt, but that's so important. Yeah.
Yes, so important. And it's also, it just saves you work as well, because sometimes you just like, well, I've kind of written about all this, and I want people to go and read that. And maybe I can just do something a little bit shorter today, or maybe I can just do a follow-up. And it's and that is creating a body of work. And that's the thing, that the old way of sending out newsletters, it was very hard to do. You couldn't create a chain of articles to send people through a funnel, basically. And this is now the great thing about Substack, is that it's allowing you to create these newsletter funnels of content within all the stuff that you're writing. And it just makes for a deeper experience, but it also just converts better. You know, it's so much easier if you've got a ton of stuff and that it's already worked, and you send new readers through it, then that's your funnel. That's the old way of getting people to sign up for a product. That's like, you've got your funnel all done. That's the copywriting of your business done.
It's true. Yeah. I have a pitch deck for it, because I have accepted sponsors on and off depending on like what I've done with it. And it's true, like it's an easy thing to pitch because it's all there. Yeah. and you can see it, and that really goes along. That body of work thing is incredibly important, because as a freelancer, especially, like you can write for 1,000,001 different sites, but it's disjointed and you can put it together yourself, but to have it organically there in one place is meaningful, and not even staff writers necessarily have that, because they're changing places over their career, right? So it is like kind of the one place where you can really, really have it. So I'm all about that too. Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of empire building. That's what I feel like. I
thought that.
Yeah.
You said that. I thought that exact phrase. It does feel like that sometimes. You're like, ooh.
It does. You're building an edifice out of all your writing, and it's all part of the same thing. So, you know, over time, you're offering more and more to new subscribers. It's like you're not, when I was trying to get people paid up right at the beginning, when I did at the end of season 1, it was hard because I just hadn't done a lot. But now it's just, well, go here, and here's all these links, and read all this stuff. It makes you more valuable as you go along. It makes your subscription more valuable. And that's literally worth a lot.
It's true. I've literally, in trying to get work or networking or other opportunities, or I've literally just fired off a text or an email and just said, yeah, here's what I'm all about. Here's a link. I don't even have to say anymore. So that's cool. that goes a long way. There's a lot to be said for that.
Well, I have a feeling both of you may have had some experience with some of the other outlets that you have written for disappearing. What do you think about the sustainability of Substack?
I think long-term, it's going to be really hard for a lot of people to make a livable wage using Substack, because Substack sets the floor of its yearly subscription to $30. You can't go below that unless you charge people a monthly $5, and I believe that's the floor for that. And so subscription fatigue is a very, very real thing. And my writer friends I know who feel obligated to subscribe to their friends' stuff, it's like that's a little bit of a different outside the writer world. Not everybody knows like 10 writers with Substacks, but that is a true thing. Like, a subscription to The Economist is what, $50? And then you're asking someone to pay for your Substack. And The Economist has copy editors and a million writers and long-term journalists, and then my Substack. And, it's very good. and many Substacks are very good and absolute publication quality, but it is true. There's at least a perception gap, even if it's not a true quality gap. And in some cases it is a real quality gap. And so I think there is some subscription fatigue out there. And I also think that these legacy publications, seeing the Substack model work, so many of them have put up paywalls and pay gates in the pandemic, kind of watching this happen, being like, ooh, subscriptions work. And so now everything is more paywalled, including the independent content. And so I do think you run into a case, it's happening in streaming right now. Netflix's revenue cratered because they lost so many subscriptions, because they raised the price and they lost, people feel like, I can't pay $20 for another subscription. I can't pay $50 for 7 different newsletters. So I think that is something that is going to have to be addressed in terms of like long-term viability. My 2 cents.
I just want to thank you both, and Jody especially, for joining us and making your time and your experience and wisdom to help us move forward as journalists. And